Morning. Settle down, folks. This is important. This is important. I'm not important. For those of you who can't stand looking at my face already, I can just tell you I'm not going to take 5 minutes, so smile. Dear Massachusetts Department of Agriculture, my name is Paul Rifkin. I live in Mashpee, Massachusetts. I adamantly oppose Eversource's 2018 Vegetation Management Plan. One of the main herbicides employed by Eversource is glyphosate, the active ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup. Glyphosate has been classified as, quote, probably carcinogenic to humans, close quote, by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, and a, quote, probable human carcinogen, according to the World Health Organization. Chemicals last a long time in the environment. I strongly would prefer mechanical means of clearing. The proposed use of herbicides on the Cape and Martha's Vineyard favors Eversource's bottom line at the expense of keeping our drinking water safe now and in perpetuity.
Tristan Israel.
Hi, I'm Tristan Israel. I'm a selectman in the town of Tisbury and a Dukes County Commissioner. I'm here today to ask that your department help foster an approach that allows the individual communities to have some say in what is put on their ground. I'm advocating that we do this through our boards of health, who can certainly educate themselves and are knowledgeable. Eversource has a right-of-way through the town of Tisbury, which abuts many private properties, private wells, is near our Tashmoo watershed. You know, we have as a community vociferously opposed this blanket spraying. We have either sent letters or attended many of the hearings you've had and that the pesticide herbicide board held as well. And we feel at this point like sometimes that we feel like we're up against deaf ears, and all we're asking for is for the ability for our community to be able to make its own determination with some expertise through our boards of health and give us that ability. It's this overwhelming opposition to the spraying in our town. And we would also like the ability even for private contractors and others, not just Eversource, but anybody who's going to do a large spraying, that there's some kind of ability for the town to say no or to regulate what those products may or may not be. And you know, we're going to keep coming to these hearings and keep advocating, and you know, we hope that you will listen. I was very dismayed when the herbicide board took a vote of 6-1 with all the testimony, all the hearings I've gone to, listening to all the people. You know, sometimes we wonder, what are we doing here? But we're here because we feel strongly about what's being put into the ground, and we're here because we feel strongly that our communities, the individual communities, should have the right to make that determination. And if we can get some help from the state in making that determination, great. But we should be able to do it on our own. And I urge you to help us to move in that direction. The lines, so they sprayed the lines this year in our town, and then afterwards they cut everything. And we kept saying, why can't you do it mechanically? And maybe, I'm sure there's some technical reason they're going to bring out for this, but it all doesn't make much sense to us. There are alternatives to doing this. Let the communities, let our communities have the right to make our own decisions. I thank you very much for taking the time to hear us. Thank you.
Maura Valley, please.
Hi, my name is Maura Valley. I am the health agent for the town of Tisbury, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Tisbury Board of Health. Like Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard is a sole source aquifer, and our water table in most areas of the power lines is less than 50 feet deep. So, you know, you're not making the separation between the water table and the application of pesticides as required by the regulation. Additionally, the power lines are in the vicinity of Lake Tajmu, a lake that has been classified as impaired by the Mass Estuaries Project. But you're applying pesticides right in the vicinity of that. And much of the power line goes along easements on private property. As Tristan mentioned, the majority of our citizens are opposed to the use of herbicides, and in this case, they're having herbicides applied to their private property absent their consent. So during the last public hearing process, the residents of Tisbury, I believe about 200, wrote letters opposing the application of herbicides, and we're here to support that opposition and ask that as you review the vegetation management plan, you look at the use of herbicides and limit them. Thank you.
Lucy Morrison, please.
Hello, I'm Lucy Morrison. I live in Edgartown, Massachusetts. I work for the Martha's Vineyard Commission, which is the regional planning agency for all of the 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard, and I'm also on the Edgartown Planning Board. I'm mostly here because I don't feel like the vegetation management plan takes into all of the unique factors involved with the island and the Cape in terms of sandy soils, in terms of shallow water tables, in terms of acidic environments. And the number one thing that I've found when you research these chemicals is that there's no long-term studies on health effects for humans, on environmental effects. With the island especially, you know, a lot of our watersheds are impaired, and there's a lot of initiatives to denitrify, a lot of them using oysters. A lot of the chemicals, specifically trichlopyr, has been known in acidic sandy soils to not microbially bond with the soil. It dissolves in the water, it travels through the water table, and it can kill half a concentration of oysters at parts per trillion. So the fact that there's just not this, it just doesn't seem right, and that's why I'm here.
Janice EWTN.
My name is Janice EWTN, and I'm a resident of Sandwich. And we're already a Superfund site here in Sandwich, but my concern is that these chemicals have not been, they haven't been researched enough. There are 9 chemicals that the Department of Agricultural Resources is using, has approved use of in sensitive areas. One of them, I'm just going to talk about one of them. One of them, testing was done, this is metsulfuron methyl. Testing was done on dogs, specifically beagles, rats, mice, and rabbits. They proved that contact with the eyes can cause permanent impairment of vision, even blindness, which makes me wonder why Eversource would even allow spraying. Don't they care about their employees? With the male rats, no deaths occurred, but there was slight weight loss. In the females, at 13-week sacrifice, there was a decrease in absolute liver weights. In rabbits, there were moderate areas of slight corneal clouding and severe to moderate conjunctivitis. Now, this is just one chemical, one of the 9, and nothing has ever been tested together, mixing these chemicals. In the mice, there were sporadic effects that were observed in body weight, food consumption, and organ weight. This chemical is practically non-toxic to birds, they said, fish, honeybees, and earthworms, slightly toxic to aquatic organisms on an acute basis. They did a four-litter, two-generational reproductive study. Fertility was low. I could go on, but when tested on the honeybee, they had acute toxicity is greater than 25 milligrams per bee, but yet there was no indication of what this means. What does this mean? Is there anyone from DuPont here or Dow Chemical that could tell us what this means to us? So at any rate, products of combustion may include toxic gases. Metasulfuron methyl is mobile in most soils. They did studies in Colorado, they did studies in North Carolina, Mississippi, North Dakota, Idaho, and Canada. Nothing was done on Cape Cod. Nothing has been done in Massachusetts. Now, I just researched this morning. This is one chemical. But I will say that there is another chemical that I just got to the end, and I just read that Dow, this is the aminopyralide. At the end of the assessment, I'm going to quote, "The information herein is supplied upon the condition that the persons receiving the same will make their own determinations as to its suitability for their purposes prior to use. In no event will Dow be responsible for damages of any nature whatsoever resulting from the use or the reliance of information." This sounds like Erin Brockovich. You know, all in caps. Continuing, all in caps, no representations or warranties either expressed or implied of merchant accountability, fitness for a particular purpose or of any other nature are made hereunder with respect to the information or the product to which information refers. So, for Sandwich Public Television, their public comment period has been extended to March 30th, so I urge you to get involved. Thank you.
Mike Tucker, please. Hi, my name is Mike Tucker from Woods Hole down in Falmouth. When looking into this issue, I gleaned a few things off of Eversource's website, and one of the things that stuck out in my head was one of their goals being minimal impact on the environment as one of their key goals. That sounds beautiful, and I should mention that I strongly oppose the spraying of herbicides on these areas. Another thing they mention is industry standards require minimum safety clearances to ensure vegetation doesn't come in contact with high voltage overhead lines. And that stuck out to me because the key being the high voltage lines are what they're really concerned with. And I'll get to that in a moment. And promising to scout out sensitive areas near wetlands, surface water, pasture, and they mention endangered species. So I just wanted to make a few comments about those things that I gleaned off of their website and from some comments that they made. You know, with the industry standard quoted on their website, it seems like the concern is the vegetation could potentially come in contact with the high lines. Now, what I want to know is, does that mean they intend to practice what is known in the industry as integrated vegetation management, which is a specific form of management that's done all over the country where the key thing is to allow the scrubby vegetation to grow, the herbaceous growth, the ferns, the wildflowers, and whatnot. If they're planning on doing broadcast leaf spraying, that's going to impact those plant communities as well. And that's a concern for a number of reasons. Regarding the scouting that they intend to do, I suppose for the purposes of what they're going to spray and what they're not going to spray, again, opposed to the whole spraying idea altogether, what is their effort to assess these areas? What exactly do they plan on doing? What are their standards that they use? How far? Is it written anywhere that they will stay away from standing water? How far will they stay away from sensitive species? So what tied into that, certain flora and fauna regarding endangered species might not be evident all year long. So what is their plan to make sure that these areas are adequately covered to get a good biological inventory on what the potential impact could be? Certain species may use host plants or as food plants only certain times a year. That might not be evident other times a year, but that power line area would still be an important, would still be very important for those purposes. And of course, seasonal movement of certain species, birds. These scrubby growth areas are important for a group of birds that are declining drastically across the board, brown thrasher being a good example of it, that uses these overgrown sort of successional growth areas. So to me, it sounds like the tall trees getting in contact with the power lines is their main concern according to their own website. So to me, manually removing those trees seems like the most important and best way to address this issue rather than using all these chemicals. And one of the things that was also interesting to me in the wording of these, the sensitive areas, in a statement they made that I read yesterday, when they listed several of these locations, they mentioned surface water but make no mention of groundwater. So, I mean, why they would overlook that for a company that claims to have minimal environmental impact as one of their goals just makes me shake my head, especially being out here on the Cape with the sandy soils and how quickly the chemicals can leach into the groundwater. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on the fact that they said they would be aware and assess and be sensitive to endangered species. Endangered species is an official designation, basically means we've gone a little too far. These are species that, you know, we should have made some better management decisions so they didn't get to the point of endangered, but there are other designations that if they truly care about a minimal environmental impact, they should pay attention to. A species of special concern is designated that way for a reason. And threatened species is another designation. And by ignoring those two, they can pretty much sweep under the rug any of these species that might be approaching a critical situation. And they already are in a rough situation. That's why they're designated as that. So seeing how they worded that and made sure that they left that omitted from their statement along with omitting groundwater was very concerning to me. And I think we all really need to pay attention to what their bottom line is. They claim that it is one of their key goals is minimum environmental impact, but I think we all know that's not what their goal is. Thank you.
Robert Richardson, please.
Thanks. I'm Rob Richardson from Brewster. Actually, I'd like to, the previous speaker mentioned Eversource's bottom line. I've never seen Eversource's business plan, but I seriously doubt it includes poisoning their customers or rendering the Cape inhabitable so that people won't come here to visit or live here and buy their product. I mean, just think about that for a minute. They're in business to make money. Yes, they have a bottom line. But killing off your customer base is not a very smart business approach. The first gentleman mentioned the WHO's, the World Health Organization's IARC statement in March 2015 that cancer, or that glyphosate, the one chemical that's found in Roundup, was declared a class 2, I believe, probable carcinogen. What he failed to mention was that in May 2016, WHO clarified that and issued a statement that it was highly unlikely that anyone would develop cancer from glyphosate. The two statements both stand still by the World Health Organization. One deals with harm, the 2015 statement, and the 2016 statement deals with risk. And there's a big difference, which sometimes I think activists forget, is that there's a difference between harm and risk. Many things are harmful: electricity, airplane travel, potentially car travel, but what is the risk factor? And when people talk about toxic chemicals being placed on or being sprayed, they forget that no chemical, whether natural or man-made, is inherently toxic. No chemical. What is toxic is the concentration or the dose. The dose makes the poison. unless you talk in terms of levels of dosage in the aquifer, which no one seems to have any evidence that there are these chemicals in the aquifer, but unless you talk in terms of dose or level, it's nonsense. It just is, I'm sorry. There are studies, you know, he mentioned WHO. There's more than 800, I just speak about glyphosate because that's the only one I'm really familiar with, and indeed there are other chemicals. And I didn't really, with all due respect, I didn't really understand the previous speaker's statement. I read the plan, I didn't read it carefully, I scanned it, but it is an integrated plan. It offers mechanical elimination of shrubbery and weeds at some point, which will increase the carbon footprint, which no one seems to care about. The pesticides, I think, is the big fear factor that people have in their minds, and I'm not sure where that all comes from. There are over 800 scientific studies, and nearly, I don't know of a national regulatory agency that doesn't think glyphosate is safe if it's applied in recommended according to regulations in that fashion. It basically interferes with the metabolic pathway of plants, which is not shared by human beings. People are not plants. Plants are not people. Now, the latest enthusiasm for opponents of glyphosate is that it interferes with gut bacteria. There's a similar pathway in the gut bacteria and some enzymes in the human stomach to what's in plants. But I don't know of any reputable study. I mean, reading these studies is like, you know, eating shredded wheat without the milk. It's difficult to absorb them, but you know, it's like climate science. People say, well, the science on the climate isn't settled. Okay, but that makes it sound like it's 50-50. I mean, if you had 100 scientists, 97 are going to say, yes, global warming is caused by hydrocarbons in the atmosphere, and 3 are not. Basically, it's the same thing with, again, at least with glyphosate. I can't speak to the other chemicals. So, you know, Disarelli said there are liars, damn liars, and statisticians. A lot of studies you read will say glyphosate linked with cancer. Well, what does linked mean? Linked means correlation. It doesn't mean causation. Linkage means that as one factor increases, the other factor increases. There is almost 100% correlation, it's 97.3%, between organic food sales and autism.
Mr. Richardson?
Over.
Well, yeah, we're just at the 5 minutes, so.
If you can just finish your thought.
Yeah, well, that was my last point. Do organic food sales cause autism? Of course not. Does autism cause people to buy organic food? Of course not. But yet whenever linkage, correlation is talked, there's usually a third factor which is causing both of those. So if you look at studies, look at whether they're talking about correlation or linkage or causation. And again, it's very doubtful, in my mind at least, that glyphosate is going to cause all the harmful effects that some of these studies purport to say. Thank you.
Stacie Greaves, please.
Good morning. My name is Stacie Greaves, and I am from Centerville. I own a company called Goat Green Cape Cod. We have been putting our goats out in areas for 3 years, managing vegetation. I oppose Eversource and the use of their herbicides, and I know we've all said what we have about glyphosate and everything, so it's common knowledge that, yes, this stuff is a problem. It's bad. A lot of people have chosen to go an herbicide route free. A lot of the abutters on Eversource have also chosen to use whether it's controlled burning, mechanical means. There are other alternatives to herbicides. Herbicides don't have to be used anymore. There's other ways we can do this. They weren't around forever. Weeds, et cetera, were managed. Roads were cleared. I think there's other solutions. And I think they need to be entertained, looked at, studied, whether it's goats or mechanical, anything. It does need to be addressed. So that's all. Thank you.
Christine Van Hoek, please.
Good morning. My name is Christine Van Hook. I live in Sharon, Massachusetts. I lived in Dennisport, Massachusetts for 10 years and fought the battle initially to prevent MDAR from spraying herbicides. I was actively involved in town meetings with Green Cape and other agencies and with the Cape Cod Commission. And at the end of the day, after investing 10 years on Cape Cod, believing that the Cape Cod Commission and the state, and specifically Mass Department of Agricultural Resources, would protect, naively, I thought, our sole source aquifer, when it became evident that indeed MDAR and Eversource were going to go ahead and spray without oversight on days that they were spraying, with the knowledge that there was a small window of opportunity between 5 and 7 a.m. when the wind speeds are applicable to be able to apply these herbicides according to the manufacturer's labels, not by some law or what they can say they can do. This is by their own manufacturer's labels. And after 7 a.m. on most days on Cape Cod, the winds exceed 10 miles per hour, and they should not be sprayed. And first of all, in all the research that I did, and being educated about this, which during that process, MDAR specifically, first and foremost, has a responsibility to work with the towns and communities to protect the Cape Cod sole source aquifer, and that has been non-existent. For decades, the utility company has used cutting and mowing methods to manage vegetation to protect the aquifer. And with all this talk about glyphosate and, oh, you know, it's going to dissipate, things I heard at the hearings from MDAR at the time. Oh, we're only going to spray this targeted area. It's not going to spread. Well, those statements don't add up. In 2003, the country of Denmark banned the spraying of Roundup after finding glyphosate contaminated the country's drinking water resources. There is now an existing problem of other emerging contaminants showing up in various towns. And certainly, spraying more chemicals, more herbicides, is not going to alleviate that situation. It's only going to exacerbate it. And I read in your vegetative management report, Mr. Hayes, whom I remember well, that now drift retardants are proposed in the VMP. Okay, so what are the drift retardants? More chemicals? More carrying agents? What are the effects and the possible chemical burdens and hazards to the public health? And, excuse me. And we don't know what those carrying agents, when you combine them with other chemicals, there's been no testing of what that effect on public safety can be. Eversource is not held to the same standards as how close they can spray to open waters and other professionals as other landscapers are, to not go between a certain amount between private wells or open waters. I specifically heard at the town meetings MDAR employees say before the town officials they are not obligated to abide by those regulations. And since the spraying has been done, We don't know if there's been any annual or semi-annual testing on Cape Cod water supply, specifically testing to detect those chemicals, that they are in fact not in Cape Cod's water supply. And in closing, I'd just like to say, as I've said all along, MDAR and the communities of Cape Cod, all of the communities have signed requests to allow themselves to not spray, to allow themselves to manage their own vegetation, to work with MDAR to manage the vegetation. If an action or policy has a suspected risk of causing harm to the public or the environment, in the absence of scientific consensus that the action or policy is harmful, the burden of proof that it is not harmful falls on those taking actions, and that would be Eversource. Thank you.
Sue Phelan, please.
Hello, I'm Sue Phelan, the director of Green Cape, and on behalf of Green Cape, I'm opposing the Eversource 5-year vegetation management plan for Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard as published. There is not sufficient time to discuss our numerous objections to this VMP, so I'll attempt to address just a few and submit the remainder, 18 pages, in written form. The 2018 VMP outlines the state regulations governing rights-of-way vegetation maintenance standards and Eversource's proposed maintenance plan. Despite Eversource's acknowledgement that Massachusetts pesticide regulations require an integrated vegetation management plan approach, one that must prevent unreasonable risks to humans or the environment, the proposed VMP anticipates the application of several toxic herbicides without attempting mechanical, biological, or other alternative controls to the exclusion of chemicals. In ignoring this legally necessary step of implementing integrated vegetation management with an intention to void pesticide use only after mechanical, biological, and alternative controls fail. And in relying on pesticide use entirely, it inadequately addresses the unique environs and ecosystems of Cape Cod. Eversource not only places the residents, wildlife, aquatic life, and the sole source aquifer at risk, but also violates the purpose and intent of the state pesticide laws. It would be foolhardy to intentionally contaminate businesses, residential properties, and groundwater when other vegetation control methods are available and have been used successfully for decades by the utility's predecessors. Allowing chemical treatments of the power line easements that interface residential and municipal properties and overlay an EPA-designated sole source aquifer is at best irresponsible and possibly criminal, and demonstrates a serious disregard for the firmly expressed opposition to this practice by the Cape community and the purpose and intent of federal and state pesticide laws, which ultimately are to protect. In addition, Eversource's 2018 VMP is clearly not meeting its stated goals and objectives listed in the VMP, which demand that they, quote, maintain the flexibility necessary to accommodate unique situations and the need for more appropriate techniques in accordance with new regulations, scientific advances, operational experience, and/or comments from municipalities, state agencies, and contractors following, or that they, quote, promote positive public relations with landowners, state and municipal officials, contractors, and the public. So here's how responsive Eversource has been to municipalities and the public on Cape Cod. Green Cape collected resolutions from all 15 towns on Cape Cod requesting that Eversource do not spray pesticides in their towns. Tens of residents, visitors, and businesses also signed petitions requesting the same, and they were delivered to the CEO of the company in Boston. In only 3 days, over 100 physicians and academics organized and sent a formal letter to the CEO opposing the spraying. Eversource has continually disregarded the firmly expressed opposition of the Cape communities, which have so emphatically and continuously expressed their continued opposition to right-of-way spraying. So much for those VMP goals and objectives. In addition, we strenuously object to the lack of record keeping required by the department regarding the identification and specific locations of herbicide use, which have characterized the last 2 spray cycles. It is a blatant attempt to avoid mass public records law. As the county of Barnstable is burdened with porous sandy soils, it is particularly abhorrent that the heaviest single end user of pesticides on Cape Cod, which is Eversource, is now allowed to hide its usage altogether with a nod from the department, despite the charge to the foreman on page 36 of the VMP under contractor daily tasks, which states, in compliance with both regulations and Eversource policy, the contractors or crew member must complete daily vegetation management reports that include the amount, concentration, product name of the herbicides, adjuvants, and dilutants, and the EPA registration number must be on file. I have sent requests for this information to MDAR and was told the utility no longer had to provide that information. This unwillingness to provide to require the utility to provide important information to towns, businesses, right-of-way abutters, and water suppliers does not reflect well on the department, which is employed in the service of the citizens of Massachusetts, after all. And based on the high potential for human and environmental impacts stemming both from known and unknown hazards associated with the VMP chemicals listed, Green Cape believes that it would be irresponsible and contrary to the purpose and intent of Massachusetts pesticide laws and regulations for MDAR to approve this Eversource 2018 to 2022 VMP. To approve the use of any of these chemicals in the unique Cape Cod region when safer non-chemical alternatives exist and not require those primarily is a failure to protect and uphold human and environmental health and safety in this state. Your department has been charged with conserving and protecting natural resources and the environment, as well as enhancing the health, safety, and welfare of the people in the state of Massachusetts. Therefore, I respectfully request that you disapprove the 5-year VMP for Eversource for Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard and I wish you would urge the utility to review and incorporate alternative maintenance options which will not put the aquifer and the residents and the economy that rely on it at any further risk. Thank you.
Steve Seymour, please.
Good morning. I don't expect you to know the answer to this, but we'd love to have it. I would. This will be they've been spraying our aquifer for 10 straight years. I wasn't aware that this was going to be an annual event. When summer comes, that NSTAR, through the auspices of the Department of Agriculture and Resources, it's going to be an annual event running up and down the Cape spraying pesticides. We do have there's a map here, you might want to take a look at it if you haven't. That's from the Cape Cod Commission, and then it superimposed the power lines that go up and down the Cape, and you're over 78% of the Cape Cod water supply. I don't believe you're allowing somebody to spray stuff over Quabbin Reservoir, but Cape Cod, forget about it. I've been down here 38 years. And when I came down, the health departments were in charge of the pesticide spraying within their cities and towns. But the state preempted us and took it away with no thought that we have a sole source aquifer, which was the whole reason we do it. When I came down here, Commonwealth Electric was the local electric company, and they did not use pesticides in particular because of a lot of respect for the Cape community and the water supply. It was only when it became Eversource, which is, as I understand it now, their headquarters is in Hartford, Connecticut, or something, that this is done. And this annual event, is this going to be an annual event odd in for the future forever? It doesn't seem to be a very sustainable practice. And there's lack of oversight. You guys don't even have inspectors out with them. You trust what they're doing. And I've been told that, oh, well, they're qualified, they've been trained, they know what they're doing. Well, you know what? If I build a house, the wiring inspector doesn't say, oh, they know what they're doing. I don't come out there. I'm not watching them. So we have this notification of abutters is a farce. Most people that I talk to never get anything from MDAR coming. They're supposed to know when they're coming. Their kids, that's their property. Are their kids can't play on their land and they're going to get exposed and bring it into the house? There are studies that have found pesticides used outside get brought into the home. You guys are, I don't know. I've really lost all respect for MDAR and in that part of the government. I'll tell you a little bit about the other concerns, health concerns. Two of the herbicides, triclopyr and imazapyr, they have breakdown products, trichlopropyrandolinol, TCP, and quinolic acid, which have neurological effects on test animals. And those can be at very low doses. The man, respectfully, the man was wrong. As you should know now, anybody that's dealing with toxicology, the dose does not make the poison when you're talking about endocrine disrupting chemicals. And that can be those nerve toxins. The herbicide Escort contains formaldehyde, as I understand it, a known human carcinogen. And of course, now we're adding into the glyphosate, which the World Health Organization and now California, that it's a probable human carcinogen. What are you people thinking? I'll let you a little know about Hyannis recently has been, because this is how the outer government does not protect us. The EPA, you guys, anybody. And the firefighting foams were used, and Hyannis water system is drinking that stuff now. They're an environmental justice community. I may sound a little angry, I'm just trying to stress, these are very important things. And they have to pay $6 million, the people in Hyannis, which are some of the least, the lowest income people on the Cape, and they're more of a mixed group of people, and they have to pay for that. And they, worse than that, they had to drink the water, as I did when I worked in Hyannis for 30 years drinking that compound. It wasn't until the Silent Spring, the state didn't help us, it wasn't until the Silent Spring Institute, which the state doesn't even like to fund, came down and tested the emerging contaminants of concern and found it, that it finally got off the plate, you know, and finally now we're doing the treatment. But we don't get a lot of help from Boston. I gotta tell you that. You know, it's like we're the poor orphans down here. You know, and think about the sole source aquifer. We can't afford more of this. And I'm going to give you one map, just because I got it, because these are the wells that got contaminated in Hyannis, and the people there say they should not be spraying any in this particular area. They shouldn't be spraying any of the Cape. They should go back to the mechanical means when Commonwealth Electric owned it, and you guys ought to put your big pants on, big boy pants on, and maybe people pushing you guys to go stop them. And I know you guys are just doing a job, and I don't mean to be, but we gotta send the message and tell those people up there. Here.
Joshua Mason.
Sorry, I just want to thank you for that passionate speech here. That was fantastic, and I agreed with everything you said over there. My name's Joshua Mason. Good morning. I'm from Dennis. I'm a candidate for state representative for the 1st Barnstable District. Now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the VMP, why I'm against the use of the VMP with the use of herbicides, excuse me. And I want to talk a little bit about glyphosate. Glyphosate is a core ingredient found in weed killers such as Roundup, the world's most widely produced herbicide. Glyphosate is used pretty liberally in streets, parks, the roadsides of many towns and cities to control the growth of grass and weeds, but was classified in March 2015 by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is an extension of the World Health Organization, as probably carcinogenic to humans, as stated before by some of the other speakers. Many European countries, including Holland, Denmark, Sweden, have banned or restricted the use of glyphosate herbicides because of its alleged ties to a myriad of health problems. I'm not just talking about cancer either. There are other health concerns as well. The myriad of health concerns include birth defects, kidney failure, celiac disease, colitis, and autism. These are all very serious issues, and in fact, another study that was done in Argentina points to a correlation between glyphosate use and the decline in activity to honeybee colonies, which are extremely, extremely important to our environment. In 2013, Friends of the Earth Europe appointed an independent laboratory in Germany, to test urine samples from people in 18 countries for glyphosate. And you know what the results showed? There were traces in 44% of those people that they studied. 44%. Because of long-term human feeding trials would be unethical, the evidence has been mostly limited to studies of agricultural exposures. However, further evidence, including animal studies, led the International Agency for Research on Cancer to its probably carcinogenic classification. Glyphosate has been linked to the growth of tumors in mice and rats, and there is also what the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies as mechanic evidence, such as DNA damage to human cells and exposure to glyphosate. The totality of the evidence has been strong enough to convince cities like Chicago and Paris to make their public spaces glyphosate-free. The city of Vancouver has gone even further, banning public and private use of the herbicides that include glyphosate. Alternative uses to glyphosate that we could apply to our environment and get very similar results would be the use of maybe more hand weeding, pruning, mowing, edging, hot foams, and I know this sounds a little crazy, but goats and sheep. These are all possibilities. And I also want to add, fungal oils to also prevent regrowth. I believe personally that we're on the verge of a bit of an Erin Brockovich moment here on the Cape. The time is now to implement the elimination of glyphosate and to protect our drinking water, our environment, and the health of our communities. And the question that Eversource needs to ask themselves, in the end, do you want to be held accountable for all of this? Thank you.
Brody, please.
I'm Abraham Brody. I presented a map that Laura Kelly handed out. I run Mac Maps, which is my own company doing computer consulting and geographic information systems. My wife is a master gardener and master naturalist, and she has helped me look at the concerns of glyphosate, and I've written this letter to MDAR. Dear MDAR, I am against the Vegetation Management Plan 2018-2022 as written by Eversource because it lists the use of chemical herbicides. Based on the data I collected from MassDEP, USGS, and MassGIS Oliver, I was able to find 10 wells and 8 groundwater discharge points near enough to the power lines mapped by USGS to be of concern to the plan. I recognize the 50-foot buffer and private to a private well as a regulatory concern. However, it has been my experience that groundwater and non-point source pollution does not restrict itself to arbitrary boundaries such as this. And because regulations have not caught up with the existing studies as to the impact of herbicides such as glyphosate, the vegetation management plan needs to be revised for Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard because we have a unique hydrology. Most importantly, the hydrology shows we have a single source aquifer. What that means is regardless of where the spraying for vegetation management happens on the Cape, every citizen is going to be adversely affected in their water quality. This affects both drinking water and farming water. Please consider discussing alternatives such as hand pruning with Eversource. As Laura Kelly of POCCA has informed me, this has been discovered to be the most effective and safe means of controlling vegetation around power lines. I've also thought about the fact that we have alpacas as a possible way of controlling plants around the power lines, and sheep certainly. And every one of these methods is safer. And we have to also think about the fact that oil-based weed trimmers are also affecting our groundwater too, because there's a lot of chemicals from the oil getting in the groundwater. So we have electric-based weed trimmers, and we can use those instead. So we have to think about all of this, and they're good lawnmowers that are electric-based too. And that is probably a better alternative than having to depend on all these oil and gas-based mechanical means. So MDAR, please consider these alternatives. We need a safe drinking water, and that's the most important thing here. Not only that, for the people who think that the chemicals aren't of concern to our bodies, we are a top predator. And as a top predator, all the chemicals are amplified through the food chain up to the top. So what's a small amount to a bee is going to be a big amount to us. And as a result, the nematicides are causing the bee extinctions. There's 7 endangered bees out there, at least. And some of them are dying off by the millions a day. And why is this happening? Because we aren't looking at our chemical impact to the environment. And without bees, we have no flowers. Without flowers, we have no fruit, no vegetables, and then we'll have no food. We'll be left with Soylent Green. If anyone has seen that movie or hasn't seen it, see it again, because who wants to be eating people as our final source of food? Because that's what Soylent Green was about. So we're looking at a final consequence here to our inaction. So let's make some action. Thank you.
Roberta McDonald, and I live in Harwich. I would like to stand here and tell you that there is a direct cause and effect relationship between pesticides and cancer and other health problems, but I can't do that. It's not been proven yet. A look at current research, not the kind of research you see in the VMP, such as research that's done in the Agricultural Health Study by the National Institutes of Health, shows that there are connections to many health issues, such as cancer and even sleep apnea. And those things need further study. Pesticides that were once thought to be safe are now being stopped. In England, they found that bees were being contaminated by pesticide, and so they stopped using that particular pesticide. And now, 5 years later, they see that that pesticide is still in the environment. Big surprise. There is a lack of current science in the VMP. The references in Appendix 10 are 10, 20, even 30 years old. The section on safety refers mostly to employee safety. How does spraying affect our health and our water supply is the important question. And everyone here has talked about the sole source aquifer, which the EPA has designated and must be protected from the risk of contamination. And here's the important part. There is no testing of water in any town on Cape Cod because the tests are too expensive. So here we are every year being sprayed upon by MDAR, Eversource, and we don't even know if our water supply is already contaminated. If our water supply is contaminated now by pesticide, we have no other option for clean water. And Eversource is ready to say they were only responsible for the 1% in that very specious phone survey they keep talking about. The pesticide VMP has gone on for a number of years, and it's time for MDAR to suspend approval and have Eversource contribute to the testing of our water supply. The easement growth should be under control by now. It's been quite a while that we've had this pesticide spraying, and the vegetation can easily be cleared with hand tools, not even power tools at this point. It's easy to pull up these saplings in the sandy soil by just using your hand. So I think overkill has been done in the past. And secondly, again from the Eversource website, which is a wonderful source of information, accountability. We hold ourselves accountable for the impact our business might have on the environment, meeting in as many cases and exceeding all environmental laws and regulatory commitments and requirements. We actively work with customers, community members, environmental groups, regulatory agencies, and civic and business partners to promote transparent operations. Our employees, as well as vendors, suppliers, contractors, are expected to adhere to all environmental laws stated in our Code of Conduct, Supplier Code of Conduct, and RFP process. We are committed to tracking and monitoring our progress via a set of metrics which receives regular executive leadership review. We work every day to ensure that our operations have minimal impact on the environment, including project permitting, spill response, and emissions reporting. Where's the water in that? In actuality, Eversource has not followed its own guidelines in the past, and MDAR has not regulated as the law directs. Some of the past incidents with the most recent VMP. Number one, appropriate notifications are not given to abutters or town officials about upcoming locations of spraying. William Hayes tells Harwich selectmen notification is not necessary. He wouldn't bother closing the windows in his house. The selectmen disagree and ask for specific notification of spraying being done. Michael Duran says sprayers need to be protected from the abutters. 2, spraying in very high wind conditions in West Barnstable was observed. MDAR was notified, and sprayers were told, move somewhere else. There was no other action taken. 3, documents provided to MDAR from MDAR, from NSTAR, Eversource, showed that spraying was done when wind was 0 to 2 miles an hour. This is a violation of label guidelines. Result, Eversource no longer needs to provide spraying documentation to MDAR. Is this true? 4, a proper investigation with samples taken of the Seahorse Farm overspraying in Harwich should have been done immediately instead of 2 weeks later. Sprayers had ignored the owner's request not to spray in the area. 5, EPA region officials warned MDAR that label requirements must be followed. MDAR rubber stamped the YOP that year and added a sentence to the approval talking about what EPA said. That was all. 6, maps were shown to be inadequate and are still incorrect. 7, the sprayers are careless and on a tight schedule. They finish in a week and have sprayed during windy and rainy conditions. Okay, in summary, due to the lack of statistical data on the health of our water supply as it pertains to pesticides and the lack of accountability in the spraying process, I urge you to deny the VMP in favor of a 5-year moratorium on use of pesticides on Cape Cod, while accurate statistics are gathered on water quality, efficiency of mechanical clearing over previous pesticide use, and accountability and good faith efforts by Eversource and the Commonwealth are in place. And finally, I'd like to say that in the past, Eversource has said that spraying opponents and MDAR and Eversource have said that the spraying opponents all say the same thing, and therefore we're all in cahoots with each other. We're actually talking about facts, and all of us know the facts. And I hope you find out.
Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Taub. I'm here in a dual capacity. I'm here as a citizen, but I also represent the town of Brewster in its legal efforts to stop the spraying of pesticides on our rights of ways. I will indicate to you that it was a successful effort by the town of Brewster that stopped the spraying of pesticides in Brewster in the year 2017 because of the legal efforts that the town pursued. I'd like to use this as an opportunity to remind you that the struggle against the pesticides has to be thought of as political and legal. And I dare say you're confusing the political and the legal. I'm sorry. When we, for lack of a better word, object to elements in the plans that MDAR is reviewing, MDAR says, where's the proof? And we say, oh, pesticide studies, species, blah, 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 blah. And they say, show us the harm on Cape Cod. And we say, oh, come on. I mean, once it's over, it's over. If the crap is in the water, we're finished. Okay? So what about the preventive principle, if you will? And MDAR says, look, we have a duty, and we are executing our duty, and you have to believe that they're doing it. If you believe they're in cahoots with the electric company, you're wrong. But they are bound by statute and regs. And when we object and they approve, and then we bring an administrative appeal, Eversource says, you people don't have standing. You don't meet the aggrievement definition. And I'm here to tell you that you don't. Unless you have a fact, a dead bee on your right of way, and somebody who says that bee died because of this, you have not satisfied the legal standard. I'm sorry. So relative to the legal challenges to MDAR, all of these notices are lovely and will have limited, if any, usefulness given our collective ends. That said, this is only the second VMP. And in the past, as I understand it, am I right about this being the second VMP only? I think so. I think the first one was in 2013. Before that, the towns had control. In any event, they relied on the passage of the VMP, which was not adequately fought the first time. And then anything in the YOP that was consistent with the VMP satisfied the standard. So this is a unique opportunity to challenge the VMP. And I suggest to you that the focus should be on the inadequacies of the VMP itself. If we end up at the YOP stage, then I think we have only harm. But at this stage, I think we have both harm and inadequacy, and I urge you to be very specific in your comments and be able to back them up. Last thing I'll say, if you don't say it now, you can't say it later. So don't be afraid of being a little creative also. Thank you. Thank you.
I will say Attorney Taub is a hard act to follow. Okay. My name is C. Wadding Rice. I am a residential taxpayer in the town of Orleans, one of the 17 municipalities noticed in the filing. And I'm here today to object to the 5-year vegetation management plan for Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, that was submitted by Eversource Energy, Eastern Mass, and remember this date, December 14th, 2017. I agree and acknowledge that 333 CMR Pesticide Board is the regulatory force in place for this action, and they are authorized by Mass General Law, Chapter 132, Section 3, Pesticide Board. I pay residential property taxes at Town of Orleans, and that is, as I said, one of the 17 municipalities. I obtain my household water for washing, drinking, and cooking from one of two sources. One, a shallow driven well, 15 feet in depth, driven into the freshwater lens, which is part of the Nauset lens. And two, in bulk, from the Town of Orleans public water supply. That water is trucked in via a NSF water quality water tank and stored on site for future use. The Town of Orleans public water supply draws its water from a well field that draws from the Monomoy lens, also a relatively shallow aquifer. Therefore, I have standing to comment on the VMP as both a residential taxpayer and a user of a private well and a public well. The 333 CMR 11.1 talks about the purpose of 333 CMR 11, and it's to establish statewide and uniform regulatory process which will minimize the uses of and potential impacts from herbicides in rights-of-way on human health and environment, while allowing for the benefits to public safety provided by selective use of herbicides. There are 4 specific goals that are articulated in the Code of Massachusetts regulation for this. I'm going to skip 2 of them and only focus on goal number 2, which is establish standards, requirements, and procedures necessary to prevent unreasonable risks to humans or the environment, taking into account the economic, social, and environmental costs and benefits of the use of any pesticide. And 4, establish a mechanism for public and municipal review of right-of-way maintenance plans. Okay. I am here today to discuss 2 aspects of the process. Part 1, a failure to submit in a timely manner. A vegetation management plan is defined in 333 CMR 11.02. 333 CMR 11.05 Section 1, Paragraph A, states clearly and in plain, simple language, quoting, all VMPs shall be submitted by the applicant no later than September 1st prior to the calendar year of the proposed first year of maintenance, September 1st. The VMP submitted by Eversource, Eastern Energy Massachusetts applicant, to the department has a submission date of December 14th, 2017. Which is almost 15 weeks and 104 days past the due date of September 1st. For purposes of my objection today, I'm accepting the date on the cover of the submitted VMP. However, it's quite possible the actual date or reception or delivery to the department may be later than December 14th. I have provided an exhibit, which is the cover sheet of that document, and it clearly indicates December 14th. The 333 CMR Pesticide Board, Section 1105, Vegetation Management Plan, requires and sets those deadlines, that's that September 1st deadline, to allow for reasonable and responsible review of an applicant's 5-year plan by all concerned parties. A shortening of the timelines by a late submittal is not in the public's best interest, nor is it in the best interest of those affected municipalities and county agencies in which proposed work is being contemplated, and public interest groups that have a mission to protection of the Cape and Islands' unique environmental conditions. Therefore, since the submission was not timely and is inconsistent with the regulatory guidelines, it must and should be returned to the applicant without any action or approval by the Pesticide Board, citing a failure to submit in a timely manner in accordance with 333 CMR 11.05, Section 1, Paragraph A, and to be in conformance with the stated purpose and intent of 333 CMR 11.012. That was one of the goals I read earlier. Back in November, on November 10th, I addressed a letter to Commissioner of MDAR and copied a number of Commonwealth officials. Yes. I didn't realize there was a time constraint because I came in late. I apologize.
Oh, sorry. We're just
okay.
giving everyone 5 minutes given the...
Okay, you should have announced that every so often. Sorry. I will quickly continue and give me 2 more minutes and I'll summarize, okay? Okay.
I'll give my time to the current speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Or no, you're not Mr. Ellis, but thank you. Basically, I wrote the commissioner back on November 10th inquiring why I had not seen a notice for the 5-year plan. I follow the environmental monitor as part of my occupation and had not seen a notice. I never received a response to that letter. However, since I did write MDAR and a number of people in the right-of-way department, I presume that put them on notice that I had an interest in this, and therefore, if a submittal came in late or if the board was going to take some action to allow it, that I might be notified. Never was. December 7th, the board met, and as far as I can determine, when I say the board, the pesticide board, as far as I can determine, there was no discussion of the VMP. In fact, the board met, I believe, on December 7th, and the VMP was submitted by their date, December 14th. Therefore, what I want to know is, under what authority was this VMP accepted? And under whose authority was it processed forward? Why was the applicant given a special privilege to file well beyond the required date? The other aspect of my comments deal with the misleading notices and defective public notices. A notice was put out, and the notice that was put out in the Environmental Monitor, January 24th, 2018, Volume 89, Issue 6, had a linked notice. In other words, you go onto the monitor and you click on it and it will take you to a formal notice. The notice, number 1, was written frequently in plural, indicating multiple hearings. Only 1 hearing was listed. The date to have comments done was March 2nd in the notice, which is well before the 45 days allowed by statute. Okay? So there was an attempt to abridge the public's right to be able to comment within 45 days. They also used the term until the close of business, and comments period end on the business Monday, March 2nd. They couldn't even get the date right. March 2nd is tomorrow, that's a Friday, okay? So the notice contains several discrepancies, inaccuracies, and could be construed to be misleading and lacking in terms of basic knowledge. What is interesting, and I've submitted a copy of this for you, the Massachusetts Secretary of State publishes a guideline on how to do notices and specifically prohibits the use of close of business. Notices must contain an exact date, time, and person, none of which were on that. There was a generic address, no person to address it to, and close a business. What is close a business? I don't know. You know, I don't punch a time clock there, so I don't know what it is.
Closed yesterday.
Yeah. Subsequently, shortly thereafter, in February 7th, a second notice was published for a hearing in Chatham. Okay? I would submit that that second notice kicks off another 45-day review period. Therefore, the review period date of March 16th in that notice is again lacking. It should be March 24th if you go strictly by 45 days. For those, now the most, I'm going to wrap this up in about 1 second here. Therefore, I recommend highly that the applicant did not meet the legal standard to file in a timely manner. Hell, they've had 5 years to get this thing done, and most of it's cut and paste from what they submitted before. The other thing that I found most interesting is first sentence, first section of the VMP, introduction. I quote, Eversource Energy, Eastern Mass, hereby submits this Vegetation Management Plan, VMP, in compliance with 333 CMR 11, Rights-of-Way Management Regulations, Appendix 3, Footnote 1, Exhibit 9. What's interesting, they're stating they're totally in compliance. Here they filed a document 104 days late. How is that in compliance? Okay? So that brings the question, what other things are perhaps misstating or misleading in their filing? I thank you for your time, and we'll be submitting some additional comments on toxology, but I really urge you to discuss with your legal counsel the timeliness of this filing. I do a lot of public filings for a lot of different things, and I've had filings denied because some messenger didn't get to an office by 4 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Paul Cass, please.
Wait, up already. Paul Cass, Orleans. I wrote out some comments, but my wife says those are self-evident, so I'll just go off the cuff for a little while. I was in the Merchant Marine for 40 years, and I had the pleasure or displeasure of 500 barrels of Agent Orange, delivering it, 70,000 tons of TNT. You know, it gets to a point where you question these things. So I also, you know, I worked with a lot of asbestos, powdered asbestos, hydrazine, and carbon tetrachloride. Now that was the first one that caused cancer and was outlawed. It was electrical cleaner. 5 years later, the substitute was outlawed. It caused cancer. 5 years later, this went on 5 times, so you finally had electrical cleaner that didn't clean. But, you know, but you go by so whatever chemicals they are, they just change the chemical and they're back in business. Now, I've read many material safety data sheets. I'm wondering if you have these for all the pesticides you're using. But I've read many, and they all say, you're going to die. You know, especially if it's supposed to, if a flame gets near it, you're dead. So, and working with OSHA, I never got any satisfactory answer from these agencies about what type of filter to use. You know, there's so many discrepancies. So it's beyond common sense. Now, here's what I wrote originally. I'll be short. Are you a good neighbor? Meaning, do you listen to your customers and accommodate them? Or are you like the tobacco spokesman and have your own conclusions based on how much it'll affect the bottom line? You know, you guys are, and I don't notice any suits here. You know, I won't call you guys, you know, the gatekeepers, but I would expect somebody in a fancy suit. I would expect a lawyer, because you can't talk to them, you know. You can trick us with parliamentary procedure and rules, you know, on and on and on. But I think you're doing a very disservice to the people that are paying you. Thank you very much.
Susan Bryan, please.
So I know it's about 12:30 now, but we'll keep going so everyone has an opportunity to speak, and then we'll start the next portion of the listening session as long as everyone. We'll keep, even though we're at 12:30 and the time is ended, we will allow everyone to have an opportunity to speak.
All right, so my name is Suzanne Bryan, and I live in Eastham. I have a few, I guess, ethical notes in regards to MDAR, because if we were going based off of the science of why this is dangerous, I think the conversation would have ended a long time ago. So I would just like to point out that I think it's very naive of the board to continue to use herbicides, because you can look back across history, not even that long ago, and find a variety of herbicides that were allowed and permitted and seemingly safe, and then they were banned. So that doesn't really instill a whole lot of confidence in me that this same, oh, but it's safe if you use it as intended. I mean, painkillers were used and prescribed as intended. They were very effective at what they were supposed to do and manage pain, and now we have a public health crisis. And those were licensed professionals. Those had guidelines. Those were regulated. So I don't really have a whole lot of faith in regulations necessarily doing their job. Additionally, it seems to be that the best operating practice you have is wait until there's a public health crisis, and I'm not okay with that. That is a terrible way to manage your business. Oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. You need to prove really terrible harm before we do something. So that also doesn't really instill a whole lot of confidence in me in MDAR or in Eversource. And then the third one is to continue to violate the consent of the communities that you work for. Other people have spoke to this. Cape Cod has been very explicit about not wanting herbicides sprayed. So whether the utility company or the state agency, they both have been like, oh, well, too bad. So how am I supposed to respect your agency as a state agency if you don't respect the wishes of the community that you're supposed to serve? And then I was like, well, who are you serving? Are you serving the community and the state and the residents of Massachusetts, or are you serving the petrochemical industry? It's kind of hard to tell which. And so we're kind of stuck because Eversource is our only company. We can't just be like, oh, well, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. I'm going to go with a different company. We're stuck with Eversource. We can't go to a different company to get our power that doesn't use pesticides or herbicides. So we're left with going to MDAR to stand up for us. And we are asking you to protect our communities, protect our health, protect our land, protect our water. And this is our avenue. It's kind of up to you. We've made our voices heard. So I would ask that you do your job as an agency that's supposed to protect the Commonwealth. I guess I went on, I was like, what does MDAR actually do? Promote Commonwealth's future, provide long-term viability for agriculture and Mass, keep Mass food supply safe and secure. And so I ask that you take action and do not approve this vegetation management plan from Eversource that includes the use of herbicides.
Michael Hall, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Hall. I'm a real estate agent, real estate broker on the Lower Cape, and I'm a resident there as well. And what can I say? We've had some great speakers up here giving some great testimony and facts. Sri Lanka banned glyphosate, which is the main ingredient that we're all opposed to. because it was linked to a 5-fold increase in the prevalence of chronic kidney disease. That fact we already were aware of. The Netherlands prohibits the weed killer. Argentina, the country's medical professionals denounced glyphosate, asserting it was associated with spontaneous abortions, birth defects, and various neurological, respiratory, and dermatological diseases. I didn't say that correctly. Publications that have offered partial defenses for the use of glyphosate, like the New Yorker and the Washington Post, have acknowledged that the chemical can severely damage the environment and harm the very crops they're meant to protect. European Parliament, representing 28 countries, immediately banned the household use of the product. This wasn't just a vote against glyphosate, it was a vote supporting independent science and a vote against an industry that has manipulated, coerced, and otherwise soiled independent decision-making in Europe and the rest of the world. I think that all of the Cape Cod towns wish that the state would abide by their, would not use the, will not allow the company to use the weed killer on the Cape. And I think the people have spoken. They've spoken over and over again. So what's the next step for the people, I guess? Thank you.
Stephanie Simpson, please.
I'm a master gardener. I reside in Mashpee. I've worked as a native plant and pollinator garden specialist and a water conservation specialist as a master gardener, as a certified Baywise consultant. I recently finished the program in Barnstable County regarding the Master Gardener program. So I have Master Gardener status working with native plants and pollinator gardens and groundwater problems in both states. I've also read a lot of the research on the risks of herbicides and lymphoma studies, particularly the studies that combine herbicides and other things causing cancer such as lymphoma. The safety results basically are inconclusive. I've read over 20 studies. There's nothing in there that says that anything that commercial companies such as Eversource will be using is particularly 100% safe. And as someone who studied the groundwater in my Baywise program, that's not good enough for me. We need to be looking at more research and more conclusive evidence before we allow these big companies to come out and spray things that we have no idea what's going to be causing the long-term damage on people's health, on the food source. We are already having problems with individuals causing this with the blatant use of Roundup. You go to the stores, Roundup is available in all stores. People blatantly use it. They spray it like they're spraying water on their gardens, and there's nothing we can do about it except complain to our individual respective towns. That's not good enough for me. The fact that a single petrochemical company has total control over the risk of cancers and various health illnesses is wrong. In addition to being a master gardener, I am a retired licensed psychotherapist who worked with many people who had physical and emotional health problems due to chemical overexposure. So I'm looking at it from a two-pronged approach here. Countries such as Europe have done a lot more research, and they have banned this kind of activity for many, many reasons. I suggest that we follow their example a little bit more and not be so quick to take this very small work of evidence that says that this is not harmful to the public, because we just don't have the clear, concise research that that indeed is happening. Thank you.